Today, I'm going to give a brief overview on four things related to forest industry markets, especially in Georgia and the U.S. South. One is I want to touch on mill closures and fiber markets. Then I'm going to touch on mill investment activity because there's some good news out there as well. Touch on wood pellet markets, which are a source of growth, and then close out by revisiting labor markets, which is always top of mind for folks that we work with and that are members of GFA. So first, the big news, mill closures and fiber markets. Part of this is a function of softer end wood markets, end product markets for pulp and related manufactured goods like that. And that's resulted over the years across North America in a series of pulp and paper closures and conversions from using wood fiber to using recycled material. In fact, over the last 3 years, and this is North America wide, covers all 5 regions that we're tracking. So that's the South, the Northwest, the northern reaches, which is the Lake States in New England, Eastern Canada, and Western Canada. Over 20 pulp mills have reduced pulp fiber use, and it's resulted in about 22 million tons as a continent of less wood fiber consumption. So that's a big chunk. And the U.S. South, which is the largest pulp producing region, has sort of led that in terms of volume. That's resulted in about 9 million fewer tons as a region, 9 million fewer tons of fiber consumption. And that was before the recent announced GP Perry, Florida closure of its cellulose mill that's going to be coming up soon. So these pulp mill closures, the ones we've had near us in Charleston and Perry and other places, these definitely have a ripple effect. And regionally, we're talking to guys who are essentially leaving wood out there in the forest. There's one operations manager that I talk to regularly. He's got operations in the Lake States and the South Central area, which is Louisiana, Mississippi, that part of the U.S. South. And he literally said, my guys are leaving pulpwood in the forest. And so you hate to hear that kind of stuff. But you also see that popping up in other regions and how it's affecting mills as well. So Vicki Swanton on our team, who represents us out in the West, she's working for us in Washington State and leads the market intelligence and collection of data for the wood fiber review out there. She's been tracking inventories at mills, and you have inventories of fiber at pulp using facilities that are at or near record highs. Another example of that is like Westrock, which is closing facilities in the South, has also closed the facility out in Tacoma, Washington. And the closure and the reduction of use at plants like that has resulted in high inventories of chips there. We have high inventories of chips in the Lake States and New England because actually the logging conditions were better in the Lake States this year than they had been in the past. And that resulted in more wood being harvested. And a lot of that wood is sitting roadside waiting for pulp mills to lift their quotas. So it's been a very difficult environment for fiber markets. Across the continent, what does this produce? It's actually resulted in lower prices for fiber, pulpwood, and residual materials, except for New England, which had an extremely wet winter, which actually held up logging activities. And that's the only region in the past 2 quarters that's had material increases in wood fiber prices. So that feels like a lot of soft news, a lot of difficult news and operating challenges, but there are also some bright spots and some good things that are happening. So the second thing I wanted to touch on was mill investment activity. Now, for a second, I'm going to touch just on Georgia on this topic, but it's been true in other parts of the country as well, but especially in the grade consuming markets, those markets that are consuming logs, chip and saw timber, those products, we see active mill investments. Recently, just in fact, the Langdale Forest Products, announced the acquisition of the Jordan Lumber Sawmill in Barnesville, which is a mill I used to work at years ago when it belonged to Weyerhaeuser, and they're actively growing their footprint as well. And you see firms like Beasley, they're expanding Thompson Hardwoods in Hazelhurst. And these are not isolated events. These are things that we see happening in Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana as well, especially on the grade markets. But you can hear, I've just touched on 2 different areas, fiber markets, which in a way have been punished and are struggling, and grade markets, which even with lumber prices and housing going up and down are still attracting capital investments. So how do you balance things out, and where do you see some growth on the fiber side of things? And one area where we've seen a lot of good activity has actually been on wood pellet markets. Those markets have actually been, especially on the export side of things. So even as demand for pulp has decreased and demand for pulpwood has decreased along with it, pellet and bioenergy markets continue to grow. Between 2020 and 2023, North American wood pellet capacity expanded by nearly 5 million tons, and that resulted in increased wood fiber use of well over 11 million tons. So these are big chunks of fiber that are finding new homes. Sometimes they're in different places, sometimes they come with different price points, but the key is that the fiber is moving out of the woods, and in many regions just finding new homes and new outlets. Stephen Wright on our team at Forisk, who leads our wood bioenergy research and is the product manager for the Wood Fiber Review, talks about how North America has really 4 key pellet exporting regions. There's Eastern Canada and Western Canada. There's also the South Central US, which is that Louisiana, Mississippi area. And then there's the Southeast. That's Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas. And when you look at the 4 regions, the Southeast, which is where we're located, historically has been and continues to be now by far the largest wood pellet exporting region. Had a record exporting quarter in Q2. Nearly 1.5 million tons were exported of wood pellets just from the Southeast region. And then looking forward, you can see all the capital investment in the South Central region. And when you're looking at even just the Southeast and you look at Georgia exclusively, you can see that there's additional investment being made in this sector with announced projects in areas such as Adel. You also have investment taking place in Alabama and in North Carolina. And so even all around that Southeast region, capital's flowing in, there are expansions taking place, and these become new markets for those wood fiber products that really need a new home. Finally, I want to touch on a topic that I always like to address, and our team, Sean Baker, our VP of Research, leads these efforts where we're studying and tracking the supply chain. Loggers, haulers, the challenges that they faced, increased costs, inflation, insurance, these kinds of things. These are real things. I mean, these are blocking and tackling issues that not only affect these individuals and their businesses, but they affect the ability of mills to get the wood fiber they need, and they affect forest owners who need things to happen in the woods. And when we're talking to manufacturers, I was at a meeting recently and in Macon, Georgia, and one person who represented a mill said, our number one issue is retention. I spoke with another operating manager in Louisiana, and he talked about the challenge of hiring new people at mills and speaking to the fact that in practice, it takes 60 to 90 to 120 days before you know if a new employee is really going to make it, or if they're going to like the work, or if there's a good fit there. And a lot of the turnover is occurring post-hire. So someone comes in, they don't like the job as much, or it's just not a good fit. And so this is the challenge, is that constant turnover in those early days of new jobs. And the challenge is, how do you find people and make them stick, or help encourage and train them so that it's a positive career opportunity for them? And we're having the same challenges in the woods. When we're talking to folks in the supply chain and loggers and haulers, what we're finding is when you try to match the capacity of the logging force to the amount of wood that needs to be transported in the US South, so speaking to the South and Georgia and Florida and the neighboring states, what you find today is that we actually have enough capacity to move the wood that needs to be moved. However, it's the flexibility of that force that's a lot different. Loggers have invested a lot in their equipment. That equipment's expensive, and they really make money by being productive and generating a certain amount of wood flow, which generates a certain amount of cash flow. However, we have a lot of logging jobs out there that are small, or there's thinning jobs, and they're not as productive. And so when we talk to forestry consultants and forest owners, sometimes they're having challenges finding the smaller crews or the flexible crews to do those jobs. And when you talk to the loggers, sometimes they're having challenges finding the jobs that are big enough to justify their work. And so one of the themes that we're talking about is, how do you get to a position where that logging force is a little bit more flexible, or that the economics make sense to do some of those jobs? The good news is there's a lot of effort and attention going into training and attracting new people at mills and for forest industry jobs in the woods, and we welcome all those efforts. If you want to learn more about the kind of research that we do in the forest industry, please visit our website at www.forest.com. And my thanks and gratitude to GFA for what they do for our sector and for giving us opportunities like this to share information.